All right, awesome. Again, thanks everyone for joining. I know it's Halloween, so I appreciate those that are here that could make it. I'll try and keep this fairly short, but again, feel free to ask questions. Again, this is going to be kind of number 2 in the series of many to come for Vuln boxes for us to do some walkthroughs, CTFs, some boot to roots. Some are mixed, kind of like this one. This has sort of flags, and it's kind of more of a boot to root sort of goal, which is essentially gain root access, on the box. So this is a little bit of information about the box. Apparently, this is a few years old. Was maybe done for a festival. It is on Vuln, been up for quite a few years. It is described as a easy difficulty easy box. That obviously take that for a grain of sand. It depends on obviously what your knowledge is. I consider myself, fairly veteran to a lot of these boxes, and some that are easy, and some that say they're easy actually turn out to be fairly difficult, and vice versa. I'd say that the first 2 flags are extremely easy to get if you kind of have a grasp on how to do some of these and what to look for and some patterns. The 3rd flag may be a little bit difficult. It actually was for me. It quite a few weeks actually before I actually found the last flag. I had to do quite a bit of research. Luckily, I didn't actually have to go through the walkthrough. Not that that's kind of that's sort of thought of as like the walk of shame. But again, we've talked about this many times, is that if you don't know, then the walkthroughs can be very helpful in doing these. So for myself, I try and at all costs not look at them. But anyway, with enough Google searching, even without a walkthrough, sometimes you can find enough resources to kind of point you in the right direction, which is luckily what I was able to do kind of in the clutch before posting this for you guys. Yeah, so let's get started. So again, this is the box. So again, this is how you would download it. Hopefully you have it up and running. If not, don't worry about it. You can follow along, take notes. It's getting recorded. It's going to be up on YouTube. But if you do have it up and running, then you can hack along. Feel free to ask questions on the why this, why that. And I'll do my best to try and keep track of those questions. So again, I'll kind of be going through kind of using my little companion here, my CTF toolkit. So right off the bat, we know that there's a couple flags. Essentially, we have, get a shell, get root access, and then there's a posting. So, I'm going to be a little cheesy here and just say like, okay, we need flag 1, flag 2, flag 3, and I'm just going to leave those there for now. So the first thing we want to do is we need to enumerate, right? So, we have our vulnerable box up, spun up in, in whatever hypervisor you're using, VMware or VirtualBox. We have to find our target somehow. Yes, the target technically gave us an IP address, but again, I'll say this many times, I get in the habit of using something to try and scan boxes. Another reason why I recommend running in NAT is just because typically you're not going to have anything else on your network running in NAT. So it will usually make things fairly easy to find. So our first step, these are kind of in no particular order, but they kind of are in sort of ways you can think of things to try to enumerate a box. So for this, we're going to go to our trusty Nmap here. We can see here that this is host discovery only. So we can literally, I don't need to copy this, but this is essentially what we're going to run to just find what targets are on our network. No port discovery yet, just to give us some ideas of what addresses may be out there. So we'll go Nmap here, we'll use our SN flag. And then actually, before we do that, let's figure out what our IP address is. So I know mine is this. That's my Cali IP address. So if I just run Nmap and then now do SN, and then my 59.0, and I'm going to do a /24. And this is essentially going to say, hey, scan the class C, scan this entire range. So it's going to go from 0 to like 254 or whatever. And so because we're on the same subnet, I should only have a few results back. And this is what's going to find our target address, because we already know our address. We already know that we're 130, And again, your mileage may vary. You're probably going to get a different IP address for sure, but nonetheless, look up your own IP, IP-A or ADDR, and you should see your own IP address. And then when you run your Nmap sweep to just find hosts up using the 0/24 on the same subnet, then you should just get back a small handful of results. So I know that if I'm 130, I know that's not the target. I know this is going to be the target. I could verify by going over here and looking because it is giving us the IP address, but again, not all hosts do that. Let's see here. All right, so now we know our target, right? So now we know the target, and now we can go back to our little companion here, and I say, okay, I know the target. Now I want to like scan all ports, but maybe I want to also, try a few other things, like maybe I want to include the service flag to see like what services are running, things like that. Some of these wrap up other flags, like sometimes you can get detection without running O, like in the SV, sometimes will tell you some information. This is sort of like a cool all-in-one sort of thing. It tells you here, verbose is the baby V, and a couple other little things. So for me, I'm going to leverage more something like this with the all ports flag. But again, this is, I think, a great little resource just to come in real quick and kind of look at some things. So we know our target, so Nmap, and I'm going to do like the little V so I can kind of see in real time what's going on. I'm going to do the SV, and this is extremely important. The dash P dash, you got to remember to do that. That's to include all ports. If you don't do that, it's just a set. I think maybe it goes up to 1,000, and there's like 6,000 or whatever ports. So, or 63,535, so 63,000 ports. So nonetheless, there's a lot of ports. And if you don't put the dash P dash, you could literally never get into a box because it's going to be one of those upper ones that you just literally aren't seeing because you forgot to put in this all ports thing. And then we'll just do the address. And we know that it is 136 because I know that I'm 130 and I'm not going to scan myself. I want to scan the target. And now what this is going to do, now that we know what our target is, it's going to essentially try and give us what's open on the box and then the services. So we're seeing this verbose mode. If without that flag, it literally just kind of sits there at this line and then just doesn't show you anything till it's done. I sometimes just get impatient or wonder, like, is it actually doing anything? So I'll run the dash V for verbose and it will spit the stuff out. But this is really what I'm looking for here. It gives me the ports, what's open, some service description, and some versioning. This is what's gonna, yeah, I mean, if you just had this and you knew what you're doing, you could probably, still continue. But having the service version is really helpful sometimes because a lot of times you might see that it's running an old version of something. Like this here, or an old version of this that has known vulnerabilities. So the version is extremely important sometimes. For us, we're really only focused on pretty much this guy right here. But nonetheless, again, it's good to see what's open. There's a ton of things we can start trying. But again, to sort of keep this this presentation down to as short as possible, I'm just going to go through the steps that eventually will just get you the flag. And I'm going to exclude the hundreds of things that I probably tried on this that I have in my notes, because essentially you don't know like where, what lies behind all these different doors. So essentially all of these are an attack vector. And within an attack vector, you have multiple attack vectors. So it's like port 22, okay, SSH. There's like a bajillion things you could try and leverage with SSH to try and get entry. Some things there might be obvious, like, oh, maybe this is an old version, I'll start there. So think of every port as like a door or a window, as a possibility like to get into our target, right? So again, we're scanning our target. We're scanning this other box that's running inside my VMware. And so these are the ports and the services that are open on that. And each of these are potential ways in, not only through the port, but also through a particular service. There's some things we could do to try and enumerate Samba, which was a dead end for me. There's also tons of, you could spend days just on Apache itself, looking at different versions and what's what's vulnerable and what's not, and all the different vulnerabilities and exploits that are around all of that. So a lot of the stuff that I tried, I didn't go anywhere, but through my endeavors, I eventually got the flags, and then actually went back and saw it just to check if there are other ways, to get things. Sometimes there's other ways you can get into a box that the author didn't intend. But for now, we'll stick to what I call the script, the path that the author was most likely intending for us to use. So right off the bat, I see port 80 open. I'm always gonna head towards that. As you do more and more Vuln boxes, you'll find that if there's port 80 open or some HTTP server running, it's probably there for a reason, and that will probably yield some benefits. But nonetheless, I might come in here and I might just copy this, and I might just kind of go back to my little toolkit here and go, okay, let me just I'll post some stuff in my notes. This is leveraging local storage, so I can refresh the page, I can skip around, and as you see here, the checklist will stay, my notes will stay. Maybe we'll go back to enumeration because we're still doing that. So next up the list, like, okay, well, I know I'll probably add some descriptions, but nikto is very common for scanning web applications and essentially, telling you what may be vulnerable. So out of the box, this is kind of like a default command you can run. There's some other options depending on if it's necessary, but for now, we'll just stick to a basic, sort of script here. Again, this IP address will need to be what your target IP address is, but nonetheless, that's what we're going to run next because we do see that we have port 80 open. By default, nikto will run on port 80. So maybe I'll clear for now and have to do H for the host, and then we know our target's 136. So I'm going to run that. And so what this is going to try and do is it's going to try and say, hey, from the information that I can grab, do I know there are any vulnerabilities? Is it running an outdated version of something? It talked about Apache. We know that's running PHP. Is that old? Just all kinds of things that are associated with web and the frameworks and how all that stuff operates. It's going to try and enumerate again, because that's the phase we're in, right? We're still just trying to figure out information about our target. That's all. We haven't even gotten a shell. We haven't hacked anything. We're literally just trying to enumerate. We're just trying to figure out what information can we gather to start giving us hints on possible. We're just kind of poking it. We're trying to figure out where can we possibly get a foot in. So it looks like a good result here is that it did find a WordPress directory in robots.txt. So this is pretty good. This tells us that most likely there's probably a WordPress site running. Usually this isn't there by default, I believe, in WordPress. So this is something that a person would individually would put into this text to say, hey, crawlers, don't look here. That's the purpose of robots.txt, which I'll show you guys in a second. And essentially saying, hey, don't look here because these are things we don't want crawlers to know about our application. We don't want these things to show up in Google searches for our website, like maybe where the login path is or where an uploads folder might exist. So all that stuff you put into your robots disallow, and the crawlers are supposed to honor that. Keyword supposed to. But nonetheless, it found it. It found robots. It enumerated through the robots list. It said, hey, I found this folder in there. It might be something you might want to look into. So I might, come in here and just, I don't know, copy this something out of here and go back to my notes and just say, hey, just, something for later on, maybe, just again, just to kind of, if I ever have to come back, or I can, print or download this, if I want to do the box again, or if I want to just do these as like quick notes and then later on go back and expand on some stuff, I can. I think it's a good habit to take notes, regardless of what that is. If it's notepads, freaking sticky note, whatever it is. I use Cherry Tree. Just get in the habit of taking notes. You have to take notes, especially if you want to do this for a living. You can't just tell your customer, yeah, I hacked your site. That ain't gonna fly. You literally need to give them. You're gonna spend just as much time doing your report and write up as you did hacking. So it's extremely important. Screenshots, notes, everything, recordings, whatever you can do to show what you did and how you did it, because that's what they want to know, so they can fix it. Anyway, so we got some information back here, WordPress. I'm also going to run a dirb, which I'll kind of end because it will run forever because of WordPress. There's so many directories and things. So dirb, again, directory buster, as they call it, it runs off of a dictionary. Essentially, it's going to say, it's going to go here to this address. Well, this is our targeted, we're going to pretend this is our target address. And it's going to go through like this slash, and it's going to try all these different paths, if you will. And if it gets to 200, which is a response of okay, which means that the page exists, it's going to log that, kind of remember it, and then keep going. And then eventually, once it expels the list, it's going to go back to the 200 and go, okay, is there another subdirectory? It's going to keep trying to build paths out of mapping the website, if you will. So again, just a simple command, you can copy and paste. Just remember, this is, you're going to need to change, this is your target. This is just an example IP. So for us, maybe I'll just run it over here, and I'm going to say, again, just the target. And again, I'm not going to let this run fully because it will run for a long time. I'm going to essentially show you that you can also use dirb to enumerate, that it will also find this directory. So nikto found the directory because it found robots.txt, which I'll show you guys. And in this file, this entry was made. And this tells us that, hey, this directory path most likely exists. Or at least this file is saying, don't look here, which to an attacker, that's saying, look here. Dirb, on the other hand, will essentially just try and see if this type of path exists. It has like a dictionary of paths, and it's going to try all of them. And again, it's going to go visit here. If it gets to 200, it's going to log it. If it gets any other response code, it's going to say, okay, that this path probably doesn't exist. Move on to the next thing, admin/admin-login, admin.php, like all these things it's going to try. So we'll run this, and again, I'm going to stop it here once it finds this WordPress directory. So I'll stop right now. So we can see here very quickly, it tried this path, but it got a 403. We're not worried about that. It tried this path and got 200. So this link probably works. This /hacking, there's probably something there. Index, that's probably just going to load the default page. There's the robot.txt that nikto found. And then went in that file and saw this this entry, which I'll show you guys. And then it also found some actual directories, meaning that this WordPress is a directory, and inside this, there's probably literally hundreds and hundreds of files. Because if you've ever done a WordPress install, actually thousands of files that get employed or deployed with those. So again, two enumeration tools that have some overlap, but nonetheless, nikto is going to try and tell you, hey, what's vulnerable. Directory Buster or dirb is just going to try and tell you what paths may exist for us to visit. So we're gonna follow up with this robots.txt that we saw in both of these. And again, I copy this stuff and just come back to my little notes here and say, hey, just add some more information. That it gives some things that it found. Again, if I forget, I can always look back somewhere. Sure, I could always check back in my terminal, but again, if I close this down, I tally down, at least I have some notes, somewhere as I'm just trying to quickly, kind of take some snapshots of what I'm doing. So we can open up so we already know port 80 is open. So usually the first thing you want to do when there's port 80 is open, just go to the IP address of the target. Now remember, we set these up to be on using the same type of network. I set the target box up to be in NAT, and I set my Kali up to be in NAT. So that one allows the two to talk to each other. They have to be on the same network without setting up some crazy rules. And two, in order for me to see a website that's being hosted on this other box, we have to be on the same network. So if I just go to the address, I should see something. And so what do you know? This is a website that this box is hosting. Let's pretend there is a web server running on our target box, and this is the website. Now, just even here alone, you could spend a day just looking at the image, and is there anything hidden? Is there, we can go through source code and all this stuff and just to see what's on the screen. But for now, we're more interested in the robots.txt, just to verify. So this is what both dirb and nikto found. And essentially it's saying disallow hackers, which that tells me to look here to see if there's a path, which we'll see. And then it's also saying allow WordPress, which this doesn't mean like access. It just means that, again, to crawlers, to bots that are trying to map the website, like your Google bots, your Yahoo bots, so that they show up in search results. Anything that says disallow, it should not show up in a search result. Anything that allow says, hey, this is fair game. You can put these in search results, but regardless, you can access them, or at least you can go to these paths. Whether or not you actually have access is entirely different conversation, but nothing is stopping you from going there. So don't confuse disallow with access. Just the robots.txt, again, is for the quote unquote bots that are scanning websites to try and enumerate like a site map. For now, we'll quickly visit hackers. I think it's hackers. No, is it capital maybe? It's there somewhere. We'll see later on, but there is a path called hackers. But we're mostly concerned with this WordPress path. So if I go I can type WordPress. Now what do you know? I actually see a WordPress website. So this is pretty good. Again, someone making a box would probably not take the time to install LAMP, the whole sort of framework platform to run WordPress and then install WordPress just to have it. So it's here most likely for a reason. And again, I'm just going to kind of stick to the quote unquote script for this. So we used Nmap to find our target. We used Nmap again to scan the target to find some open ports. We saw that we had port 80 open. We ran nikto and dirb. We found that there's a WordPress directory running, both in nikto and dirb. So with WordPress, the next logical thing would be for us to probably try to enumerate the WordPress application. So that's Alexa. So with that said, we're going to go back to our trusty tool, and again, we're still enumerating, right? We haven't gotten into the box. We're still poking around. We're seeing like what's open, what's running, where are possible like entry points. So like, okay, well, we know WordPress is running. It's very common for these to run on vulnerable boxes, and they're very common entry points onto the box, as we'll see here. So for those who are not familiar, wpscan is essentially a tool dedicated to scanning WordPress sites, to try and enumerate users, to try and enumerate the themes that are being used, to enumerate all the plugins. And then once you know the plugins, you look those plugins up. A lot of sites that get hacked isn't because WordPress, it's because of a plugin they're using that ends up being vulnerable because the author abandoned it or the user of the WordPress plugin never ever updated it again. Same goes for WordPress, although if you're hosting them on some sort of shared provider, most of them will auto update. So you're typically always going to be on the latest version, but that may not be the case with plugins. And there are a lot of vulnerable plugins out there that people still use and vulnerable themes, because a lot of times, unfortunately, with anything open source, people just get in the habit of just grabbing anything they want and can through that's open source. So it's like, oh, I get WordPress. I want an image carousel or something. So there's like 1,000 of them out there that are free that you just download and install it, but you have no idea like who wrote it or what the maintenance is on that, or if there's a vulnerability for it. You just don't even think about it. You just grab it and now it's on your site. And if that gets exploited, then your site gets exploited. So a lot of vulnerabilities that you'll find out in future boxes just in plugins alone. But we're specifically looking at users for this instance here. So again, with WordPress, whenever we find a WordPress site, it's probably going to be a good habit to run a few of these. There's some overlap information that you will see when you run them. You could just run it, I think, without any enumeration, and I think it may go through all of them. But for time's sake, for now, we're just going to focus on users. And what's interesting about WordPress is that from the outside, you can essentially enumerate users. There's some config files that you can sort of scan that will tell you like actually usernames that that you would use to log into the application. So Again, we're going to come over here, and now we're still in our enumeration phase. We're still finding out more information about our target. We know that the target has multiple ports open. We know that one of those ports is port 80. It's hosted in a web server. We went there. We know that there's WordPress running. It could be a rabbit hole. It could be a dead end. But again, it's usually there for a reason. One, if not multiple flags are usually associated with something happening on within the WordPress site. So what we're going to do is we're going to leverage our little helper here, and this is what we're going to run. And again, this is the target. And sometimes you might have to add a /WordPress, which is what you'll see here. Essentially, you need to tell it like where the WordPress site is. In a live application, the WordPress site itself is usually in the root directory, but in this instance, it's not. It's in the / because the root directory for us just showed us that picture of the world or whatever it was, the space thing. And then when we went here, the root directory is just showing this. This is normally where like WordPress would be installed in like a live environment. But for us, it's in this WordPress path. So that's what we're going to focus on. So we're going to run our wpscan command, and we got to do our -- URL to tell it what we're doing or where we're going. And then again, for us, the target IP address. And we do have to do WordPress because that's where it's at. And then we need to do the -e to enumerate, and then U for users. Now what this is going to do is run some enumeration to the WordPress directory and all that's associated with it to try and give us some information on what users exist for this application, like literally what names are of the users that you can log into. And it found 2. So this is pretty awesome, right? I mean, like, I just scanned the website and was like, oh, there's 2 users that have access to this. That's just like pretty awesome information to have right now. That's half the, like in brute force and anything, that's half the battle is, okay, well, I need to know a username. Now I just need to find password. If you don't have username or password, then good luck. You're going to be there for weeks, months trying to figure that out. But right off the bat, we are given 2 users. I'm more concerned with this guy, right? Admin. That sounds pretty like pretty high up the ladder on access. So again, maybe I'll just copy this and user identified and go back to our little toolkit here, put in some more notes. Think maybe like, hey, I might need this information later. Just somewhere to dump it quickly. And we'll come back here because we're going to come to exploits next. So, all right, awesome. So we have our users. Actually, we'll go back to our enumeration still. We're still working with wpscan. And now that we have a user, let's see if we can guess the password. So within Kali, there's a very well-known word list. Word list is literally a list of words that are used for passwords. It's called RockU because there was a plugin or I forget, it was back in the MySpace days, and it was like a configuration that you could set within MySpace or link them. I forget how, but essentially that company got hacked, and then the passwords that were associated with like pretty much everyone on MySpace were included with that. So there's literally like 1 million or so passwords that are like real world passwords. Granted, these are very old now, but a lot of times you'll find that in these challenges, it's going to leverage this RockU list. One, because RockU comes with Kali, right? And then most of the things that you're going to do in these vulnerable boxes or hack the boxes, most of the stuff's included in an OS. Like you're not going to have to go out and buy something or do something too crazy. Most of the stuff, when people make these boxes, they know that you have access to this RockU list, and most of the time they're going to make a password exist in that list. So for now, we don't know that, but we're gonna try it because we do have the username. Again, that's half the battle. So let's just see if we're going to get lucky. And so we're going to essentially use this to see if wpscan, since it has the username, if it can use the RockU list to get into the target. Essentially, just try passwords over and over and over and over and over again to see if it can get in. So type So I know my RockU text is in here. You can also, if you're not sure where it is, you can just do like a okay, RockU, and it'll tell you. I believe it usually exists here. This is where it typically lives. And you can just unzip it and then move it wherever you want, or unzip it there and then just make sure whenever you're trying to call it, you're using the full path to it. Again, I use it quite often, so I just have it in its own words list directory in my Kali. But again, you can just use the locate if you're not sure where it is. By default, if you've never unzipped it, it will be zipped up, but you can just unzip it to wherever you want or move it and then use it from there. So now that I'm in this directory, I won't need to specify a path when I'm typing the script out for wpscan, and as you'll see here, so I'm calling wpscan. I still have to give it a URL. I have to give it a target essentially, right? And I have to point it to the WordPress directory. So here's where you would put passwords in, and if I'm not in the directory of the word list, I would need to put that path here. But because I'm there, I can just say RockU, and because it's obviously unzipped. Again, if I didn't, I'd have to specify a path to get to RockU. So I'd have to put in like user share word list if I unzipped it in the directory that's kind of comes in. And then from here, I can do the usernames. And that's going to be admin, because we found that out because wpscan was able to enumerate the WordPress application and find admin. And then we can also do max threads, I think that is. And then I forget what the max is. It might be 50 or even more. So now what it's going to do is it's going to try and out of this list of like however many millions literally of entries of passwords that exist in this list, it's going to just go down the line. It's going to try one, it's going to try the other one. It's just going to keep going until eventually it gets in. So I believe when I timed this, I think this ran for like 3 minutes. So while we're waiting for this to run, any questions so far? Again, I know that I'm taking a very direct approach. I'm not going through all the things that we could be trying along the way. There are a lot of ports open on this. There are a lot of different attacks that we could essentially try and be and try and run. But again, since we're waiting for this to take a few minutes, any questions so far? Is anyone else hacking along? Ron, are you able to follow along? Have you tried some other things? Anyone else hacking along? I'd love to, feel free to chime in, unmute your mic. Questions, concerns, thoughts?
No, I'm following right along actually. So I'm right where you are, where I'm trying to let the RockU text.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so again, for those with the RockU, remember it does come zipped, so you can't access it until you unzip it. But all Kali installs come with that list. So all you have to do is just use the locate feature to find it, unzip it, and then move it to some directory or leave it there. But for me, I put it in a documents folder, and then once I'm in that folder, I don't have to specify a path. So yeah, and then you can do gunzip or gunzip, whatever you want to call it, as Arian put in the chat. That's how you can unzip it. I believe that's a default Linux type of zip. I don't think you'll need to do an apt install to do that. So yeah, so Citizen brought up a good question. So yes, anytime there's a website involved, there's logs. I can speak firsthand for that. If it's, in this case, Apache, 100%, there's access logs in Apache, and literally any attempt, there's a log that gets put in place. So depending on if there is some sort of SIM that this is funneling logs into, or a WAF or something in front of it, yes, you may have tripped something and set off an alarm, or you're just really noisy, and then at some point the admin could go back, look at the logs, and clearly tell that an attack had happened. So it really just depends on, again, doing more enumeration, more recon on the target. Do you know that there's some sort of IDS or IPS in front of the thing? Do you know if they have some sort of something on the security side that's going to be alerting? Yes, everything is logged, but it doesn't mean that the user may actually get alerts. But yes, everything is logged. At some point, I can actually show you, if I have time, I'll show you the Apache log of this and then replay maybe one of these attacks for you guys to see like what it's doing. And then WordPress itself, there's plugins that can log failed attempts. But the server itself also is logging, not necessarily failed attempts, but just attempts in general of gets or requests, things of that nature. But you can see here, we got pretty lucky. Sure enough, we found the username and password. So again, the username we already had because wpscan was able to find that. But default installation, nothing changed. Password's admin. That's a big no-no. Shame on that person. So again, we'll just kind of go back to our notes and maybe just add that, hey, we have some more information on this thing. That's good stuff to have. So now we're going to move from enumeration to exploit land, because now we have a username and password. Now this is just to get to the site. This isn't to get to the box, but this is to log into the website. But that's still, there's a lot of things we can do on a WordPress site once we have access to it to potentially get us onto the actual server that's hosting the WordPress site. So right now, this is where we're going to kind of pivot from our enumeration phase to possibly exploit phase. So if we were to let the dirb run long enough, we would know that there's a login area of the website. As most CMSs, content management systems like WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, there are logins that you can get to that are like the backdoor admin logins that you can get to from like anywhere in the world because it exists on the site. So if anyone can eventually find that link, and then sure, they'll be presented with a login and a password. And if they have that, they can log in and manage the website. That's one of the benefits to these types of applications, because you don't build it on your machine and upload it. When you want to make a change, you don't do that from your local machine and then upload it. You do it from the actual application itself. So for WordPress, one of the default paths is typically a WP-login. So if I go WP-login, I should see the login. And again, I would have eventually found this through dirb if I let it run long enough. But I already knew that existed. And again, it's just common for WordPress sites. At some point, if you know it's there, there's a lot of things you can just skip and kind of just jump right in. But for demonstration purposes, I wanted to kind of show you guys, what running dirb would look like. And this would continue to run because it found these directories. And as you can see here, it found the upload and then moved on. It found this, and then it didn't find any more directories. So it went back to upload right here, and it started enumerating what's in the upload. Now, once it finished that, it would actually go to the WordPress directory and then start enumerating all the files in there. One of them would be this path here. So we have our username and we have a password. So now we are literally logging into the WordPress application as admin. And this is how you would manage your WordPress site to add more blog posts or add pages or do anything you would want to do as an owner of this website. So sure, if we were like, kids back in the 2000s, we'd do like a defacement and we'd be like, haha, like, I pwned your site and put some, calling card or some ASCII art or something and, just deface it and whatever. But we've grown since then. And now we're on to bigger and better things. Now maybe we'll do some things that aren't so obvious. Now it's more about, I don't want to deface it. I want to gain access. I want persistence. I want to maybe set up like a Bitcoin miner or do something to make money, and not just like essentially the virtual equivalent of graffiti. So we have our WordPress thing here. The first thing you will always look for are like plugins. Like, hey, what plugins exist? Are there any like upload plugins? Are there any plugins that I can already leverage? It doesn't seem like it. Now we are admin. So technically I could add whatever I want. However, I don't want the real admin to come in and go, hey, where all these plugins come from? What's this upload plugin? Like, I didn't install that. That's going to tip someone off. So again, we're trying to be somewhat stealthy, or at least, go through the motions of that. So we'll So we don't have an upload plugin we could leverage to upload our a reverse shell, because that's what we're essentially, our goal is, let's get a reverse shell to run so that we can actually access the actual server running the website. We're not really too involved with the actual WordPress. Like the application itself, to me, is just like a means to an end. I want access to the box. I need to get in there and I need to get root. So this is just one of many steps that we may be doing along the way. So a very, very, very common trick is to modify a page that exists in the website to give us, or to implement, or to paste, if you will, a PHP reverse shell or shell, right? Because again, WordPress runs typically on LAMP, which is Linux, Apache Server, MySQL, PHP. That's just how WordPress works, and a lot of these CMSs, that's how they work. So we know PHP is running, and plus we already found that out from one of our initial recons back way up here, when we found that PHP was running right here. So we know PHP is running, plus it has to pretty much just to power WordPress. So with even that, there's, that's pretty old. Version 7 is the most current. But for now, you're not really worried about that as an attack vector. But we know PHP is running, so we should be able to essentially run some PHP script that could essentially call maybe back to us, and we can leverage that as what we call a reverse shell. So the PHP script is essentially being run by the server to give us like a shell access onto the actual server, because it's allowing PHP to run, and it's going to execute that code, and that code just happens to be a shell instead of like showing a page or running some other function. So, well, okay, so we're gonna upload our shell. Well, where do we do it? We don't have an uploader plugin. So one of the very common places to do this is, again, we talked about before, editing a page. And this is actually pretty brilliant because it doesn't leave a very known or documented trace, if you will. So we can see here that like this is the CSS themes that it's using. We can see over here all the different templates and all the different pages and things like that. One very common thing to edit is the 404. And for those who don't know, the 404 is when you go to a website and you put in a wrong path, you're displayed a 404. That's the technical server response for like, oops, like this doesn't exist. And it's very common for them to be like a theme or a template, so that when you go there, it's not some generic like text message. It's like, it's themed, it looks pretty, it fits within the theme of the website, but nonetheless, it's saying it's like a 404, like, hey, are you lost? This doesn't, there's no page here. What are you looking for? This doesn't exist. Some things like that. So a lot of times we can edit these, and you can see I've already edited mine. If you're there for the first time, you should see a bunch of information, a bunch of PHP that already exists, some text, a bunch of other stuff that gets rendered to the page when a user goes to that website and puts in a path that does not exist. For us, though, we're going to use that path to execute our PHP script. So again, we go to our little handy companion, and we're on our exploits page, and we can see here the very first one is reverse web and reverse shells. A very common one, again, is this one. I could technically run this simple web shell, which is not a reverse. It runs on the application, but it's what I would consider like a dumb shell versus this being more of a smart shell. And this is a reverse shell, so this actually will be able to leverage our Kali instance to access. Whereas if I upload this shell, I actually have to navigate to the page, as you can see here in the description, to run commands. And I'll show you guys real quick. So if I was to use this shell, and notice here, I don't need to put in any addresses because I'm running it on the actual website. So if I go back here and I paste what I call the dumb one, and then update the file. Now, instead of a 404, this is there. So now if we go to that page, we're not going to see anything. We're not going to see the default 404 message that comes with WordPress. We're going to get, and we're going to activate our shell. So now I'll just open up like another tab. And again, I'm still on the same network. If I go to, let's see, 136. Or actually, you can see it right here. All right. So this is the page that we modified over here. The 404 template. This is the path for that. This is what's running the 404 template sort of generator. So if I was to go to the WordPress site and go to some other random page that doesn't exist, it calls this page to generate a 404 output. But because we're hijacking that and we're implementing our script, and we look back over here, now we can see, like, in order to activate our shell, we append the $CMD equals and then a command. And then we can run local commands from a web shell, if you will, onto the box, which I'll show you guys. So we got to do $CMD equals who am I? Let's see if that runs. Oh, sure enough, it's almost as if I'm on the box and I typed in who am I? Well, now I know I'm www-data. So this is pretty cool, right? I'm literally almost, it's like I'm in the box, but I'm not. I'm just, because I'm leveraging a shell, I can use this web UI on the website to try and get access. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Like, what else can I do? Can I, like, ls? No, that doesn't work. Okay, maybe I can do okay, so that's cool. PWD works. I can see where that is. We can just try, like, uptime. Okay, that works. So there are some commands, but we noticed that we know who am I worked. We noticed that ls didn't work. ID works. So far we're doing pretty good of getting some things, but this isn't that interactive. So we got host name. Yeah, let's try. Arian's on the ball, giving me tons of. That didn't work. So we'll see using this. We'll see that some things work and some things don't work, which is again why I typically don't use this unless it's like an absolute must. We can see this may or may not load, I'm not sure. So we can see here that, like, while this is awesome and there's some things we can do, this did show some information. There are some commands that don't work, and honestly, like, I'd prefer to have an actual terminal to essentially, like, leverage this to move around about the cabin, if you will, as I would normally on a Linux box. So that's why, again, we're going to go back to our reverse shell, which is essentially going to say, hey, I'm going to open up a shell on this port, and whoever's listening on that port can access me, like, remotely from our attacking host. So I'm going to leverage this one instead and put in the IP address for your Kali instance. Remember, because this is going to try and connect back to our Kali instance over this port. This can be whatever you want it to be, but the target IP has to be your Kali instance. 159.130. So I know that's my Kali terminal IP we did from here in the very beginning. So I know this is my address. I know the target address is 136, but I know that this is my Kali address. So that's what I have to point it back to, because this essentially is when I go back to this page and refresh it, it's going to try and connect to my Kali box. So I have to listen for that connection, which is the next thing essentially that it's going to tell you to do. And again, this is common. I didn't write this for this. I didn't build this and write this for this VulnHub particular walkthrough. These are just things that I use all the time that you will probably use quite often. So granted, some things you're going to have to like account for and change and paths and targets and all that stuff. But nonetheless, like, this is giving you some pretty decent information of, like, steps you should be doing, because they're very common steps that you'll probably do over and over and over again. So this tells us, okay, well, here's a reverse shell, but we also have to initiate the reverse shell somehow, which tells us essentially just to go visit it, which we already did before when we ran the local commands, but we upgraded our shell to a better reverse shell than this sort of dumb shell. And then now it's saying, okay, well, it's going to try and connect back to your Kali instance. So how do you listen for that connection? This is exactly how you listen for that connection. And because we're using the same port, right? The port has to match. So whatever this port is, this has to be the same port you use in the target, or sorry, right here. So these ports have to match in order for this to work, because this is the port that it's calling back on my Kali machine. And so if I'm not listening on the same port, they'll never sync up, if you will. So I'm gonna literally leverage this. So I know this is here. I'm gonna update it. I gotta update this so it saves this one. So Citizen brought up a good question. Yes, aren't you giving the site owner essentially where we're connecting to? 100%. So technically, like obviously, if the site owner was to find this file, was to find this template that had been modified, technically what I would do is upload my own file and shell somewhere else in the thousands of files on WordPress that the user would never find. I mean, this is pretty like we're being very noisy at this instance, because this wouldn't take too long probably for a user to find. You know, logging in, seeing plugins is one thing. That's going to be a dead ringer. Like, hey, I didn't put those plugins there. What's going on? Maybe at some point they might, you know, check themes and check 404. So as Char mentioned, yes, an attacker would proxy. Anything did not come from his home IP address is essentially for sure what you'd be doing, since we're actually using a non-obfuscated callback, if you will, to an asset somewhere. So you bring up a good point. Obviously, yes, if we were being real hackers, I would hope that we would be leveraging proxy chains or Tor or some way where this IP address cannot be linked to us as an individual or an asset or where we live. But for demonstration purposes, we're just going to literally connect directly back to our Kali instance. But yeah, it's a very good question. So if you're doing this in the real life, which you shouldn't be unless you have permission, 100% know that, yeah, this essentially is saying, hey, this is where I live, you know, to someone looking at maybe where the attack came from. Plus, again, going back through the web log, which I'll show you guys, that's logging your IP address as well. So it takes a lot of planning to be a little bit more stealthy on an attack. But for demonstration purposes only, we don't really care about logging alerts or any of that stuff. But nonetheless, we have our reverse shell. We have it saved. We know that the path to it, right? We can get rid of this. And if I run this, I'm not going to see anything. It's not doing anything because nothing's listening yet. So how do I listen, right? So I got to go back here, and I got to listen. I got to listen for what I got to. Essentially, I'm telling my Kali instance, hey, like netcat, try listen for connections coming over this port here, leak or 1337. So now that I have this, I'm going to run this, and it's going to say listening. So now it's saying, hey, I'm listening to any traffic coming in on this port. Now, if I go back here and I refresh the page, now I see something happening. I'm not going to see anything load here, but I see it's making a connection. And if I come back here, I'm connected. So now I have a reverse shell from the WordPress site. Instead of using the WordPress site to try and run commands, which is a terrible experience, I can now just do it from home or my Kali instance. So now I can run some of the same commands and I'll get the same results. Except for before, LS didn't work. Now LS works. So I have a better, smarter shell, if you will. So this is awesome. Now we are literally on the box. We went from recon, we went from outside to, we went from finding the target, we went from scanning the target with Nmap to find open ports. We found a web server running. We found a WordPress site. We were able to get the admin username. We were able to brute force that to get the password. We were able to log into WordPress, and that was really our first awesome foothold to get into the actual box. Now we are actually essentially in the Linux box hosting the WordPress site. So with that reverse shell, that's really the first leap, if you will, in the foothold to gain access onto the actual server. Now we are on the actual server. We are in this box as we don't have passwords or credentials, but this is the user that we are. it was once we got dropped into, if you will, from the reverse shell. But now we are literally on the box as this user. We can do whatever this user allows us to do. But before we do anything else, I want to try and get a better shell that gives me a little bit more flexibility on some of the things that I can do, or maybe the things that I can run, or even just for looks. So again, another very, very, very common shell that we'll run over to the exploits it's under privesc, is this Python bash shell, which you're going to use like on every machine probably that you're hacking. You'll probably use some fashion or form of this Python script to spawn a PTY shell. So what that looks like is we're literally just going to paste it and run it. And now look, now we have what you might be more accustomed to looking at if you were an actual user on a box and you had logged in. You're going to see more of like the path. You're going to see more of like who you are as the user on the host. And you're going to have a little bit more flexibility on some of the commands that you can run as in this type of shell, because there's different types of shells and levels or layers of shells. As you can see from before on the WordPress, we had like a very, very basic one that didn't work all the time. Then we got the reverse shell, which was better, but there's still some limitations in that, and we didn't quite really, it didn't give us an output that maybe we're familiar with looking. Then we spawned our Python shell that was able to give us a little bit more information on like how we are used to like looking at things. So awesome. So now we are essentially on the box as this user. Again, there's usually where like a lot of the fun would start. Now is where you could spend days doing more enumeration. There's all kinds of scripts that if you can do like maybe wget, if we have access to wget, then we can try and get scripts onto the box, or we can start programming our own scripts to do enumeration. We can start running commands to see what we have access to. We can see like list of sudos, or can we access password files? I mean, there's just a ton of different things that we could do. But again, to sort of stick to the script of finding these kind of flags in a linear fashion, we'll just sort of jump to some things. So one of the common things that you'll do is, again, and I'll say this over and over and over, and I mentioned this numerous times on the last walkthrough, typically when you land, again, when you land as in like you gain access to a box, the first thing you want to know is like, who am I? Like literally, who am I? Okay, so we know who we are. Where am I? We already kind of know where we are because it's telling us. There are some other things we would run, but we can't because we don't have a password for this, and it'll probably prompt us for credentials. We sort of circumvented that as a user with the reverse shell. But one place we always check is home. Always, always, always. And sure enough, okay, we have a directory in there. That's interesting. I know that this isn't where the site's being hosted, because that's just not where you host websites. The websites on Apache is hosted here, typically var www. So this I just know is some other random folder. And sure enough, our first flag. And if we can cat it, we can clearly see that that is a flag. So I might, go like all the way up to here, maybe, and just copy that and just put it in some, again, just what I call crude notes, just again for later. So flag one down. Okay, cool. Go back to my little cheesy checklist here. Boom, flag one down. Awesome. Well, we know there's two more flags, so we got to figure out where those are. Again, there's a million things we could leverage. The find command to start trying to find stuff. Now that we know the format, I mean, some might call it cheating, but if we know that it's like maybe flag.txt, we could try and literally scrub the machine for anything labeled flag.txt. But there's some other ways, being more sticking to the fun of trying to find the needle in the haystack, if you will, going over more recon things. There's a ton of things we could do, scripts we can pull into run again for enumeration. One of the more common places you'll look when you have a WordPress site running is the WordPress config file, because if you've ever launched WordPress or installed WordPress or any CMS, content management system, there's usually a config file that's a .php that essentially lists everything that the website needs to know to run, like database info, usernames, passwords, locations of things. It's literally like a configuration file. It tells the application how to run and how to connect to things and what to connect to and what credentials to use to connect to. So sometimes you can get very lucky just by checking the contents of that file, just to see if there's any plain text credentials, which a lot of times there are. That's just the nature of it. Now, this file is not something that you can access from the outside. So essentially, it's like, you can have credentials in them and not be too concerned. But if a user was ever to gain access to the box, like we just did, that's probably when you wouldn't want to maybe have them in plain text. But it is very common for them to be in plain text on like a Joomla, Drupal, or WordPress site. So again, typically what we'll do is we will try and navigate back to where WordPress was installed. So again, I know that WordPress is in the var www. If you've ever set up a web server on Apache or on Linux, that's just by default, that's just where websites, that's just where the web server hosts. So I can come here and I can look and I can see, sure enough, there's WordPress. Plus, remember this was here. That's how we got to the website to begin with. That's where all the content to the WordPress website is. It's in this directory. We're just now on the server going into that directory, as opposed to from the outside looking in, just seeing a website being hosted. You can also see here, this is everything that's being hosted on the box to the web. So you can, you could spend days just, once you found some pictures that we saw, the planet, there's other directories that are hosting plain simple websites or JPEGs, and you can go through, look at those, and is there data? Is there something hidden? I mean, there's literally countless things to check before, finding the flag. Oh, it's literally like a needle in a haystack. But again, we're just, for demonstration purposes, we're sort of just cutting to the chase. But again, nonetheless, it's very common to check a WordPress directory, and you can see it here, all the sort of WordPress functions. You can see that's like the admin login. Here's if you're activating WordPress for the first time, which maybe this was like an initial setup, how you can activate it, and like once you do the install of how to sort of set it up and where you put in the database path and like the credentials and things like that. But this file here is extremely important. And again, most of the CMS type applications have them. This is for WordPress. This is the WordPress configuration file. And again, in here, it's very common to see paths to different things, what the application's doing, and usually like credentials to the database. Maybe those credentials, one could, obviously they can get us into the database. We know that for sure. Maybe there's some other information in there, or maybe we get lucky and those same credentials are what the root user just uses across the board, which is again, very common. People use same username, same password for a lot of places. And that's how they get in trouble. Maybe we can reuse those credentials to gain access as a root user. Because remember, we're still this guy. We're still this guy right here. We got to get to root somehow to get that other flag. So if I cat this, and again, we remember we want the config.php. And so essentially the cat, we're just displaying the contents of that file. Char mentions like a company using the same local admin password on all their Windows machines. Yeah, that's a terrible thing to do, because if you get that, well, then now you have access to all the machines. But again, it's very common. People or creatures of habit to use the same credentials over and over again. Just like if you're setting up something for the first time, maybe you're new to setting up your WordPress site and you're like, I don't want 12 different passwords. I'm just going to use the same thing because why not, So I'm going to use the same username and password to make the thing and to make the database and to make the database admin. That's also the same one I'm using to log into the Linux box as root. Like what do I care? Like, who's going to hack little old me? Or that's just the last thing on your mind, and you just use credentials over and over again. So we're going to cat this. And so we catted the file, and this is the config file. Anything with the stars essentially is just commented out. Anything without is actually what's running. So this is literally things that WordPress, there's the prefix for the database. So when you log into the database, you'll see this pretty much in front of like the tables and things. We can see some other information. We can scroll up and let's see here. to our surprise, what do you know? We got a username and password to the MySQL database. Now, we're going to skip a few steps here because you could go down that rabbit hole and you could log into the MySQL database. But you could also just try this password for root to see if that, in fact, if that works. So again, I'm going to copy this. That's some awesome information to have. Anytime we get a username and password, you got to write that down. You just have to. So we got root, or we got root as a user and the password. Now again, this is for the MySQL database. This is how WordPress can connect to the database and make changes, pull changes, how you can make modifications to the website, and that's how those stick, how you can have users and all these things associated with having a website running off of a database. There has to, the front end, the PHP front end has to be able to talk to the back end somehow, and the only way to do that is through a set of credentials. So in this case, when the user set up WordPress or set up the database, this is the credentials he created for the database. And then these credentials get passed along to WordPress. Again, that's just how these applications work. So with that, now that we know we have a password as simple as root password bang, we can try to sudo up. So I'm going to try and just change users to root. It's going to ask me for root's password. And I'm going to put in the password we just found. And what do you know? Now I am root. Normally, game over, done. We own the box. We can, whatever root can do, we can do because we're root now. But the game's not quite over yet. We still got to find some flags. So remember, what do we always check? We always check home, which we already did, and whenever we're root, we always check root. And what do you know? So you can see here, I already put some files on here to do, well, this comes with VMware, but you can see I already had done a few other things already. That file is not going to exist in your distribution, but nonetheless, I do see a flag.txt. So we can still run that. And again, this so happens the naming convention is the same. Sure, we could have cheated and run some find commands, although we wouldn't have been able to access it. We would probably know where it exists, because we didn't have root permissions. We are still www data, but nonetheless, there are ways to sort of cheat and find flags if the naming convention is the same. But nonetheless, we'll probably want to just copy this and just put it some simple notes here again, just to have. But now we're a root and we got the second flag. So that's like 2/3 the way. So now I'm gonna go back to my little cheesy little checklist here and boom, flag 2, done. All right, last flag. Now, this was a tricky one. This took me quite a while, mostly because it wasn't, it was just more of like a, hey, you should try this. So going back to the website here, you can see that there's 3 flags on the machine. 1, get shell. We got shell from our reverse shell. 2, get root. We got root because we found the username and password in the config file, and because the user used the same credentials, that's how we were able to exploit that. 3 is like, hey, there's a post-exploit flag on the box. And that's what stumped me, because that's like saying, hey, that's just like saying like there's another flag. I mean, essentially. So usually when you're root, it's like, again, it's kind of done. You find the flag as a root and then that's it. This is saying like, hey, there's like another flag somewhere that may not be as obvious. And again, it took me a really long time to sort of find, but I found in my travels this article about cron jobs. And for those that may or may not be familiar with cron jobs, it's usually just a way you can kind of set up scheduled jobs to run. For now, we'll just say on Linux. And Arian posted some awesome stuff here, post exploitation commands in the chat. I'll fire that up. But essentially, it's just, again, things to do after you've exploited a box. But I came across this article and I was like, oh yeah, cron jobs. You know, I should probably look in there and to see, like, you know, what's running, what jobs are running, are there, you know, what sort of things are happening. And again, it's just an automated task. It's like a schedule. You set it to run and it runs at that hour, the day, the time, the month, the week, whatever it is, however you set it. Things that run. Common things are like cleanups, delete temp folders, maybe delete all kinds of, I mean, you know, like keep everything clean. Maybe you don't allow user data to persist on the box more than like a day. So literally whatever you don't save off the box somewhere else after that day, you come in the next day and log in, and whatever you had there is gone. So, and that's kind of typical maybe for certain users that typically wouldn't be storing things, so you wouldn't want something persistent on there. But nonetheless, it's like a place to check, if you will, to kind of not clear. I guess not. If a place to check just to see like what things are scheduled, or to see like what things are running on the box. So again, it wasn't something that I initially like just leapt to after I got the second flag, because I was a little stumped. Like, okay, like usually when you're root and you get the flag, it's kind of like you're done. And this sort of like caught me off guard. Like, okay, I'm doing something else now. Like, okay. But again, finding that article, going back to the cron, you can kind of go into the Etsy, and then you'll notice here there's a couple of different cron things. The most common is the cron D, but there's a bunch of like cron tabs. I can cat cron tab, and you can kind of see like what the format is of how things would run on the daily, weekly, monthly, I think hourly as well. So then if I go to cron D, I should see something that kind of meets one of these formats. It kind of tells me like how it's running. There we go. So now I'm in cron D, and I can see whatever things are scheduled on this device, and I see that there's this PHP 5. Again, it could be anything in there, but if I cat now the PHP 5, I can see that this is in there as a job to run. And then sure enough, I find my third flag, and this the author is specifically saying, hey, it's a good idea to check the cron tab to learn about operating system, good job. But it's again, the cron tab is something maybe just to put on your checklist to run, to see the jobs that are running char, put in something. If I actually, let me copy this real quick and then I'll back out and then run. But again, we will say that is the third flag. Check this off our list here. Go to our notes and put in our last flag. And boom, that's good. So let me back out. And what is he? I haven't run this command, cron tab -L. No cron tab for root. I need to be in it, or maybe this doesn't run as that user. But nonetheless, we found the third flag in checking the cron jobs. So this actually took me for a long time. I don't know if Eamon's on. Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, you are there. He was with me when I spun this box up, and we were like hacking it in real time. I think like within an hour and a half, I found the first two flags, and then spent like, we were up to like, I don't know, past 1 trying to find the third flag, and I was just at such a loss. And then literally spent it's been weeks since we did this, on and off. It's always kind of in the back of my mind, one of those things bugging me, like, where's that last flag? And again, coming across a few articles of like post exploitation, where to check, what to do, how to leave persistence, so you can kind of always get back on the box. We kind of did that with our reverse shell. As long as the WordPress site exists, it doesn't matter if the server goes down, comes back up. That file will always remain until it's removed. So we do have some sort of persistence. So that's always like a checklist you want to do once you do gain access. Like, hey, I want to make sure I can get back into that box. But again, we can do that as long as the website is running, since that's where our reverse shell exists. So yeah, so those are the 3 flags on this box. Again, I would consider this kind of one of the easier ones, especially for the first 2 flags. If you're somewhat, if you've done a few of these boxes and you kind of start getting some things under your belt with some things to do. And again, just to kind of go over all the different things that we tried. Again, going back to enumeration, we found our target using Nmap. Once we found some certain ports that were open, we leveraged nikto and dirb to find that there was a WordPress site running. We leveraged wpscan or WordPress scan to enumerate the user. Then once we enumerated the user, we leveraged WordPress scan again to brute force the username and password. And then once we got that going, that's where we got basically into our exploits, and we were uploading our reverse shell, which was this one, because we tried our other dumb shell, if you will, and it wasn't, we couldn't do all the commands we would want to normally do. And we had to do them from an unusual environment versus from our Kali environment. So that's why typically we'll leverage the reverse shell. So we leveraged our reverse shell that actually got us into the actual box. Once we did that, we leveraged some privilege escalation techniques to spawn a better shell, which we used the Python to spawn our PTY shell. Within that, there's a lot of other things we could do to start seeing what we can do with sudo. We could try and find the SUID to see what we can run maybe as root. Here's a ton of different shells we can, if any of these sort of show up in our lists, we can try and start leveraging different ways to execute a shell to try and give us root privileges if we are, say, allowed to use FTP as root. Well, sure, we can use FTP to, to upload, download stuff, but we could also use it to spawn a shell. But it just so happens that we weren't really given any privileges to run any of these extra commands. But in your own sort of enumeration, once you're on the box, you can feel free to try running some of these things. But nonetheless, again, just to sort of stick to the quote unquote script, we leveraged this Python shell. And then once we leveraged the Python shell, we literally just did some more enumeration. We found that inside the config file, there's a username and password, and we literally just logged in as root with that username and password. And then from there, it's just sort of more kind of hunting, pecking the proverbial needle in a haystack of things to try. But nonetheless, we have at least our crude notes. We can print, we can download. Again, just to have them, and we can always go back and expand, which you should always do. But at least you have these. As you're just sort of kind of in the moment and you're hacking, you can just copy and paste real quick. Maybe these aren't your final notes, but maybe these are just enough notes to where you can get the flags or get to a place where you have to stop and then come back the next day and you can say, okay, I ran this command, I did this. This is how I get back to where I was, and kind of pick up where you left off, because it may not be realistic that you're going to sit down and in one sitting hack the box from start to finish. So it's always good to have notes just for so you can pick up where you left off, but also just to have it because in these notes, you're going to find some key things that you're going to probably leverage quite often in your journeys on these vulnerable boxes. So that's it. That's all 3 flags for this box. We're going to take next week off. We will follow up the following week with another VulnHub box. I haven't picked which one yet, but nonetheless, it'll probably be a similar easy one with some of these similar attacking techniques. I do have another version of the toolkit coming out. We're on 1.2 now. I have a few little upgrades and enhancements for 1.3, but nonetheless, any feedback is appreciated for this. I know it's kind of cheesy, if you will. It's not some amazing thing, but I think that I think it's a good, like water wings, some floaties, some training wheels to get people off the ground, to get people doing, having some things as like a checklist, some things to try, some things to do while they're doing their VulnHub boxes. I think a lot of these are going to be, I think you're going to leverage a lot of these over and over. And in the boxes we're doing, I can guarantee you that we'll be leveraging these tools because they're used so commonly. Yeah, that's it. That's the box. I will end with that. Thank you for coming. Now is the time we can definitely open up the chat for any questions, concerns, thoughts, and all that fun stuff.